My name is Nick Kazvini-Gore, and I serve as Director of Federal Affairs at Applied Intuition. It is my great honor and pleasure to moderate this congressional keynote with Congressman Jim Langevin. I realize that we've reached the last session, but this is really an exciting panel with a truly distinguished leader in the national security space. So I'm grateful for you all. Before I begin, I'd like to, we'll have 10 to 15 minutes of moderated discussion following with audience Q&A, so really encourage you all to submit your questions into the portal. Congressman Langevin has a long and distinguished career, which I'll summarize briefly. He is a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee and chairs the Cyber, Innovative Technologies, and Information Systems Subcommittee. He also chairs and was the co-founder of the Congressional Cyber Caucus. He's also authored dozens of pieces of legislation to enhance our national security through robust innovation, including the recent National Cyber Director Act. Congressman Langevin, thank you so much for joining. Over to you for your opening remarks.
Nicholas, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It really is great to be here with you, albeit virtually, and let me just say how disappointed I couldn't be there in person, because I'd obviously much rather be with everyone there in person, but I'm in Rhode Island this week right now because of COVID protocols. So, but I do want to just begin by thanking both the Atlantic Council and Applied Intuition for hosting the Nexus 22 Symposium. I'll start off by saying you are both shining a light on the need for greater innovation at the Department of Defense, and I'm always excited to speak alongside other bipartisan leading voices who have worked so hard to encourage innovation across the DoD. We need it so robustly right now. So I've begin by saying I've dedicated my career pioneering adoption of cutting-edge technology within the department. And as the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Subcommittee on Cyber, Innovative Technologies, and Information Systems, I know that this work will continue long after my departure from Congress at the end of this term, after 22 years, I should mention. So it's been both the honor of a lifetime to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I'm really encouraged by the Department of Defense's efforts in this space thus far. I'll say that organizations like DIU and AFWorks and the Silicon Valley Defense Group and DARPA have made incredible strides when it comes to pushing the envelope and developing groundbreaking technologies to support future generations of U.S. warfighters. It's also important to recognize the critical role, of course, of the private sector in the development of emerging technologies in support of national defense and their significant contributions. Many private sector partners to DoD are smaller companies that are moving fast and transforming quickly, and that agility is just so important, and we need to harness it, take advantage of it. And just by way of example, I was out in Silicon Valley just a couple of weeks ago and was incredibly impressed by the small companies that I visited and the progress that they are making. Just by way of example, we're seeing private sector entities developing game-changing solutions for applications of things like artificial intelligence to our national security. So here, I believe that we must absolutely support and leverage these innovations, because whichever nation achieves primacy in the development and deployment of AI and quantum will enjoy almost insurmountable advantages over other nations. And that's why I work to establish the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, review their recommendations, and champion provisions in must-pass legislation like the annual National Defense Authorization Act. Much like AI, autonomous vehicles are a critical emerging technology that have the potential to revolutionize the battlefield beneath the waves, on the ground, and in the air, keeping our warfighters at a greater physical distance from the fight while delivering results. So these are just a handful of the types of technologies that we should be focusing on, and I am certainly proud to have played a role in in these efforts and bringing them to maturity. I'm also proud of the contributions that I've been able to make in the field of cyber, because I believe the investments in our national cybersecurity and critical infrastructure resilience go hand in hand with our efforts to develop and to deploy emerging technologies. Simply put, the cyber threats facing our country have never been greater, and American technological leadership will depend significantly on our ability to defend against those threats and recover quickly from disruptions to critical infrastructure. To that effect, one of my proudest accomplishments, as Nicholas mentioned, was authoring legislation to create the Office of the National Cyber Director within the Executive Office of the President within the White House. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done on many levels in cyber, but we're going to continue that effort, I promise. I've said before that science fiction is fast coming fact and reality, and to stay ahead of our adversaries, we must innovate faster, streamline our acquisition processes and policies, and encourage a culture change within the federal government. I believe we must push the limits of innovation, and we can't be afraid to fail. I like the Elon Musk philosophy that if we're not failing, we're not trying hard enough. Well, leaders from Capitol Hill to the upper echelons of the Pentagon absolutely must embrace this mindset and set the tone for the rest of the department. By changing the culture of the Pentagon and our acquisition processes, we can stretch beyond research, development, test and evaluation, and transition to the most promising technologies across the valley of death that so frequently plagues our efforts. So here, we must harness the innovation already happening in the private sector. We must cultivate the digital workforce and educate more senior leaders on the benefits of autonomy, and we must fast track critical technologies to get them into the hands of the warfighters where they are needed the most. Here, we cannot sit on our laurels. We know our adversaries certainly are not. And I'm worried that here we're actually losing ground to countries like China on emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, by way of example. So as we've seen over the last several months, also Russia is unafraid to put their advanced technologies like hypersonics into use in the battlefield. It's critical now more than ever that we make the necessary investments to maintain a technological edge over our adversaries and prepare for the economic and national security challenges of both today and tomorrow. So with that, let me just say thank you again for having me today, and thank you for the critical work that you are all doing in this space. I also hope that you'll view my office as a resource going forward on these issues. While this may be my final year in Congress, I certainly will be working to my very last day to support this community. So with that, thank you, and certainly look forward to our discussion and to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chairman Langevin, for your robust remarks. The perfect capstone to a day with many voices. I want to pick up on one theme you mentioned, that we have a lot of bipartisan voices here. And certainly your career has really been distinguished by your ability to work across the aisle to advance so many national security issues. So on one hand, you have issues like Ukraine, which have brought together a lot of Republicans and Democrats together to counter Russian aggression. But then on the other hand, you have issues like the January 6th event, where there's increased polarization. So the question I have is, how do we recommend to up-and-coming members of Congress to maintain that bipartisanship focused on all these issues? Because without bipartisanship, we can't implement any of the recommendations that we have discussed today.
Yeah, great question. I'll start off by saying that, look, we need bipartisanship for the big things to happen, right? It's really the way we collectively solve our nation's challenges, and we really do need to come together now more than ever. It's one of the reasons why I love my national security work, because if you're ever going to find bipartisanship, it's going to come in the national security space. And on balance, that's mostly what I see and what I experience on the House Armed Services. It doesn't mean we're not going to have disagreements from time to time on specific areas, but overall, I really do believe that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are really dedicated to doing all we can to protect our nation, defend us on the many against the many threats that we face. That we come together in a bipartisan way to support our warfighters, our men and women in uniform who are in the field, putting themselves in harm's way to protect all of us. And we want to do everything we can in our power, as I've so often said, to make sure that our warfighters never enter a fair fight. We want to make sure that we're giving them absolutely every advantage. And so that is my goal, and that's how I operate on the committee, and whether it's armed services, whether it's Homeland Security Committee, where I also serve, or in the issue of cyber. Again, I won't see, there's certainly going to be, some areas of disagreement, but overall, I think there's more agreement when it comes to national security than there is division.
That's great. And to build on that point, a lot of these issues that we're talking about, reform around acquisition, talent, workforce development issues where you've also been a leader, these don't often make the headlines, right? Often, folks making outlandish statements or people appealing to the both sides of the aisle or the fringes of the spectrum are getting all the press attention. Do you think it's possible that we can work to tackle these difficult challenges, even though they may not make the headlines every day?
Sure, I do. Having dialogue is always important. Again, whether it's events like this, whether it's working groups within Congress, these types of discussions are really important to have. So, I believe in the politics is still the art of the possible, and we need to get back to those core principles.
Great. I want to dig. You also mentioned in your opening remarks your recent trip to Silicon Valley, and given that the theme of this conference is linking the divide and serving as the nexus between innovation and the national security enterprise, I'd love to learn, what were some of your lessons learned from your trip, and do you think that it's possible to bridge this East-West divide?
Sure it is, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about organizations like DIU, AFWorks, and as I mentioned, also the Silicon Valley Defense Group that are working with small, innovative companies and trying to help them cut through government red tape within the acquisition processes at the Pentagon, and make sure that we're helping them to get across the valley of death. So there's still more work to be done there, and we need both resources and time and effort to be laser focused on supporting these small, innovative companies. But I'm so impressed when you look at the work that's being done in artificial intelligence or quantum, things like developing unmanned aerial systems, VTOL technologies. These are exciting, cutting edge companies that are producing amazing products, and we want to make sure that we're helping them to get over this valley of death, and that's going to be a continued, ongoing focus for both me and for the committee.
Well, one of the things you mentioned is the innovation happening in Silicon Valley, and what's interesting is in Ukraine now you see the warfighters that we've trained. I know you serve as a member of the Ukraine caucus in Congress, are actually innovating on the battlefield now. So some observers will say that the war in Ukraine right now is like a 20th century war, right? Where you've got javelins blowing up Russian tanks, and these are technologies that have been around for many years. On the other hand, you see the Ukrainian forces using drones very innovatively and asymmetrically to counter the invasion on their territory. So how do you as a leader on innovation in the Congress, what lessons do you take from the war in Ukraine that we at our national security enterprise can also take as well?
Sure. Well, I'm excited to see how the Ukrainians have adapted. They're certainly making the most of the weapons that we're able to put in their hands. Everything from Stingers to javelins to these drones that are also themselves a weapon that can be used to target Russian mechanized units and equipment, and they've been highly effective. Most, of course, especially is the resilience and the tenacity of and the commitment of the Ukrainian people to fight for their own country. Unlike we saw in Afghanistan, that the Ukrainians have really stepped up and they are confronting the Russians head on. And we in the United States and our European partners are standing behind them. President Biden and his administration are doing everything they can to get them the tools, the resources, so that they can defend their own country. But I've been incredibly impressed with how the Ukrainians have adapted, and they're using innovative technologies like drones, both for ISR and also for targeting Russian forces. And we need to continue to support them in their effort.
Thank you, and we'll really miss your leadership. You mentioned your retirement. Of course, we wish you well into your retirement. I'm curious, you've been in the industry for or not the industry, the field for so long, and what unfinished projects, if you were in Congress another 10 years, what are the unfinished projects that we as a community should carry on to ensure that our national security has all the innovation that it needs?
Sure. Well, continued focus on the areas that I've already been very highly involved with in Congress. I want to continue to encourage my colleagues, and both in Congress, but also people outside of government and key technology companies to continue to focus on things like cybersecurity, on artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, electronic warfare, another area that is important both on the offensive and the defensive side. I've been working on these issues for a very long time, and I do so because they're critically important to our country and to the warfighter, and Congress cannot let them fall by the wayside in the future. And so I'm hoping that other colleagues and new members of Congress and current members of Congress will take these issues up and continue the passionate fight to see that they grow to maturity.
One of the other themes I'd love to pick up on
is certainly private sector has a big role.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the other themes I'd like to pick up on is the United States, our ability to deter our adversaries like Russia and China is our ability to field and accelerate the deployment of innovative technologies, right? But on the other hand, we're a democratic power, right? And the Congress has a really important role to provide checks and balances over the Department of Defense to make sure that there's ethics in AI, trust in autonomous vehicles. So how do we strike that balance where we're, as you said in your remarks, and as you helped co-found the National Security Commission on AI, which one of the findings is we are falling behind China. So how do we strike that balance of maintaining the cutting edge while also staying true to our democratic values?
Yeah, great question. And this is going to be a priority for us as a country. It needs to be, and we need to stay focused on that. Even though we recognize, unfortunately, ethics and morals in programming and use of data sets are not going to be a priority for places like China and Russia. We need to be true to our values, working with our partners and allies, being very forward-leaning as AI and machine learning technologies are developed, to make sure that in the programming and the data set, the use of data sets, that it's done ethically, responsibly, morally. We have an obligation to lead in this area. It needs to be a forethought rather than afterthought. It needs to be a priority and stated as such, and we need to really put our money where our mouths are. And of course, that's true where congressional oversight will just be critically important. But again, I believe that the private sector has a critically important role to play here in partnering with us in that effort.
One of the other issues that came up in previous panels is and it's well known, is the reform of the legacy DoD acquisition process. So to dig deeper into the JCIDS process, what recommendations are there to provide flexibility for dealing with non-traditional hardware or potentially software solutions? Would you have, potentially if you're looking in the NDAA, or I know USICA right now is being conferenced, are there any opportunities there to reform certain processes to ease the engagement of small businesses in the national security enterprise?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure what's going to come out of Utica and the Competes Act that's in conference right now. Hopefully, we're going to have some good things in there to bring down barriers for allowing small businesses to be able to do business more easily with the federal government. But yeah, the acquisition process is cumbersome. It doesn't have the agility to move with the speed that we need to. But we need to make sure that going forward that it is much more software centric as opposed to hardware centric. I often think of the F-35 is not. We shouldn't be looking at it as an airplane that happen to have some computers on it. We need to look at it as almost like a flying computer, software focused, software centric, that happens to be wrapped in an airplane, and that's the model that we're moving toward, and future acquisition will, I believe, be much more nimble. It'll be more focused on open architecture and getting away from just the big primes driving this, but also as upgrades come, as numerous innovations, cutting edge innovations come about, that will be more easily able to integrate those changes, and they'll be done quicker and again less cumbersome, and again continue to give the warfighter every advantage that they need. In the past, it was very difficult to do software upgrades, for example, to major weapon systems. I can tell you that I was just on the phone with one of the key leaders from Stratcom. We were talking about the ground-based strategic deterrent, as well as the upcoming B-21, and it is much more software centric, and it's going to be more open architecture, allowing for upgrades to happen much more rapidly, and you're not going to be stuck with the expensive, cumbersome process that existed in other major weapon systems.
Yeah, and part of that integration, constant integration of software into these systems, is closely linked to the ability of Silicon Valley and innovators across the country to recruit the best talent. And interestingly, China has really worked hard to keep students that are studying here to come back, often through coercive measures or otherwise through high salaries, right? And so we're now competing as a nation to keep the best talent here in the United States. So as a leader on workforce development issues in the STEM field, I know you've co-authored and co-sponsored many amendments in the NDAA related to that. What is the congressional role in strengthening defense innovation workforce? And then how can we as the private sector help policymakers in that effort?
Yeah, really critically important, right? And going forward, we have all the great, the best policies in place, and the right changes to say acquisition reform, and having both the software and hardware innovations, bringing them to maturity. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to people, and if we don't have the right people in place to develop the technologies, to implement the policies, then we have already lost. So I've been working hard to make sure that we're developing that talent. Very big supporter of STEM to STEAM initiatives, especially starting with our young people, next generation, encouraging our young people to think about a field and working in the STEM fields. But then also looking at how we're at our education system. You hit on a really key point where we educate so many people from around the world here, and then we send them back home. We need to have comprehensive immigration reform so that when people graduate, if they want to stay here in the United States, they're going to go into key critical national security fields and say STEM fields. They want to stay here and grow jobs here. We should be encouraging that and creating policies that will facilitate that type of a transition. One of the things that I am trying to do, just by way of example, the director of the CIA currently has the ability to grant a path to citizenship to people working in critical national security fields, according to the way the director sees it. I want to give that same authority to the Secretary of Defense. There's no reason why we should be educating the best and the brightest and then sending them back to foreign countries, particularly in China if those individuals want to stay here and we can offer them a path to citizenship. We should look for ways to do so. As long as we're not changing the national security background checks and all the dotting the I's and crossing the T's, we want to make sure that if there's a way, and it's in our national security interest to allow individuals to stay here, that there's a pathway to do so.
Thank you so much, Chairman Langevin, for your comments and remarks. As I said before, this is the perfect capstone to a very informative day. So I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know you've got votes coming up. And so thank you again, Chairman Langevin. Thank you to our audience for your great questions. We wish you the best in your retirement, sir. But first, before that, we know there's a lot of work to do. NDAA is coming up, so wish you best of luck in that. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.